If it's Friday, President Biden's Homeland Security chief heads for the border as communities brace for a potentially massive migrant post-COVID surge. And the U.S. struggles under the weight of hyper-partisan political system that makes any kind of problem-solving virtually impossible. Plus, President Biden tries to tout a stronger than expected jobs report and historically low unemployment as investors and voters grapple with stubbornly high inflation and an alarming string of recent bank failures. And the leader of Russia's mercenary group lashes out at Putin's military, vowing to withdraw from a key battle, saying Moscow has doomed their fighters to, quote, senseless death. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd reporting in Washington. And whether you call it pragmatism, the ability to compromise, or the art of finding common ground, getting things done in a lasting way in Washington has always relied on the middle, the center, however you want to describe it, or the pragmatist. But right now in this political climate, moderate feels like a dirty word to most politicians and a lot of their voters. And it's leading to some dire consequences. Just look at the situation at the southern border, where Title 42, the pandemic-era policy that blocked hundreds of migrants from crossing the southern border, is set to expire next week. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas is at the border today, visiting with border agents as they prepare for the incoming surge that's already pushed border communities to the brink. And as he told me on Meet the Press last Sunday, congressional action is needed to fix a broken system that is essentially being held together with executive branch duct tape and papier-mâché. In a different era, this is when a bipartisan working group of moderates would come to the rescue. Think a gang. Where are the gangs? Back in 2013, the so-called Gang of Eight came close with a deal to overhaul the U.S. immigration system. It passed the narrowly divided Senate with nearly two-thirds support, a little over two-thirds support. But it met a partisan demise in the House. But 2023 ain't 2013. In fact, here's one of the members of that 2013 Gang of Eight, South Carolina Republican Lindsey Graham, earlier this week, placing the onus to act on Democrats and the Biden administration.
But to the Biden administration, what the hell has to happen for you to change policy? At what point are you going to take this seriously? At what point are you going to rise to the occasion? America is under siege here, and you're sitting fiddling while everybody is burning in America. They've repealed policies at work because the left has forced them to make political decisions on the border that's putting our country at risk.
But the facts are increased partisanship and a broken primary system has incentivized inaction. It's all brought us to a point where the governing class is as small and as unpopular as it's ever been in Congress. Moderate Republicans like Alaska's Lisa Murkowski or Utah's Mitt Romney, they're more unpopular in the Republican Party than they are in the Democratic Party at times. How about moderate Democrats like Joe Manchin of West Virginia? He's a common target of liberal ire. Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema left the Democratic Party late last year amid blowback for her more moderate positions on a range of issues. Across the country, true moderate voters are being completely drowned out. In our latest NBC News poll, just 14% of respondents call themselves strictly independent. They don't lean one way or the other. It is a very small group of voters. With both parties moving further away from each other and such a small coalition of true moderates in America, it's no wonder that the center simply can't hold. And when the center can't hold in American politics, nothing else can. And when you can't be a progressive or a conservative but make peace in the middle, and you're not treated as a progressive or a conservative because you made peace in the middle, you can't accomplish anything. So let's begin with the latest from the southern border, where, as I mentioned, communities and border officials are bracing for a surge. Our own Julia Ainsley is at the border for us.
Chuck, I'm down here in Brownsville, Texas, along the Rio Grande, where just this morning in this sector, they apprehended over 2,300 migrants. Some of those migrants are back here now, even some children crossing now because they think this is the time to come. Of course, we expect even more migrants to be in this area and across the southern border next week when those COVID-19 restrictions known as Title 42 lift and more migrants will be allowed to come into the United States to claim asylum. But border leaders who came down here from Homeland Security said not so fast. In fact, they're going to make more restrictive policies that'll start next week to restrict asylum access. And anyone who didn't first make a claim for asylum in a country they passed through on their way here could be deemed ineligible unless they meet certain criteria. By and large, though, these border communities are saying that they are preparing for a record-breaking surge. In fact, in Brownsville right here, they've declared a state of emergency. The sheriff here says they need more federal support. In El Paso, Texas, they have over 1,000 migrants sleeping on the street. Again, this is ahead of the surge. So today, Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas visited this very spot where I'm standing and spoke to the press. And he also spoke to members of Border Patrol and people who will be enforcing these policies, the border policies, especially come next week during that surge. I asked him if he's worried about Title 42 lifting, and I asked him if our border is secure. Here's what he had to say. Are you worried about Title 42 lifting next week?
I'm not worried about Title 42 lifting. We recognize the challenge at the border. We recognize how serious the challenge is and how difficult it is. But worried we're not. Our responsibility is to plan and to execute on those plans, and that is indeed what we have done and continue to do.
Is our border secure?
Our border is secure. Border is secure because we are maximizing our resources to deliver the most effective results to our border with the most extraordinary workforce in the world.
Julia Ainsley reporting from Brownsville for us. Also joining me now on Capitol Hill is NBC's Julie Sirkin. And Julie, if this were a natural disaster hitting the state of Texas, there would be a bipartisan supplemental bill that would be passed by the House and Senate that would basically say, here you go, executive branch, here you go, DHS, here you go, FEMA, here's extra money and resources. We know you need it. This is an emergency. We'll put our policy debates aside here. Is there any of that attitude right now? Because there is some basic resources DHS needs, but it seems as if Congress doesn't have any interest in providing that because of the partisan divide.
No, completely. And if one thing over the last couple of years since 2013 cemented this partisan divide on the border, it's for the former president's comments of the border wall. And that's something Republicans privately admit to me. They say all of this changed when the former president started using that rhetoric. It pushed people to their corners. We do have a bipartisan bill on Title 42 that came to light yesterday. That's from Senators Kyrsten Sinema and Senator Tom Tillis, also Senator Joe Manchin, not exactly the most popular figures around their Democratic colleagues. The two Gang of Eight members that you saw in that 2013 picture, Senator Durbin and Senator Menendez, are hard-pressed to get behind this bill. They've been trying to negotiate a more comprehensive border package. That's not going to go anywhere. We know Republicans in the House are set to take up their bill next week. That's not going to pass in the Senate, of course. But what is interesting, and what some moderates are pointing to me as a small victory here, Tony Gonzalez actually signed on to that bill. He's that moderate Republican Democrat from Texas who essentially tanked Republicans' efforts on putting forward a more stringent border security package earlier this year. We'll see what happens with that.
I was going to say, how should we look at this House bill? When I look at the highlights of it, it doesn't come across to me as something that's so unreasonable it's not part of a negotiation.
Yeah, look, Democrats are going to stand in line with Democrats. I was talking to one moderate Dem just this morning about this. They're nervous about this bill, right? Because McCarthy is forcing them to vote on something. They know it's a problem. It's going to come about a day on the day or a day before Title 42 is set to expire. So this is obviously a big issue, but Kevin McCarthy certainly doesn't want to hand the administration a win here by trying to even hurry up and muscle through this Title 42 bill. I mean, that's just not realistic. And what that bill essentially would do in the Senate, of course, the House bill is more comprehensive. It funds the border wall, something Democrats have called an absolute non-starter. But what the Title 42 bill will do is it would temporarily allow the administration to expand this policy, not by the basis of a public health emergency, but give them a tool essentially to get out of this mess. And it would go past 2024, past the election there. So we see what they're trying to achieve here, but unfortunately, they're not going to have a lot of goodwill around that.
Yeah, maybe Title 42 and the debt ceiling together. Julie,
that'll be fun.
Right? Very quickly on Title 42 and the Senate side, can you find 8 other Democrats? You think I could get 60 votes? And I assume it's the Democratic side that would be the harder extra 10 there.
It's so interesting. I was at that press conference where you played a bite from Senator Lindsey Graham earlier this week. I asked him, what other alternative do you want to Title 42? His answer is that the executive branch has all the tools in their toolkit to do this on their own. They don't need Congress. Now you have this bill emerging. By the way, Senator Sinema and Tillis are also working on a more comprehensive package. Democrats privately are kind of upset that Sinema is taking the lead on this and they're being left out of these negotiations.
Yeah.
It's not going to get put on the floor by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer because his alliances are not so much with Senator Sinema as they are with the more senior members of his team that have nothing to do with this bill.
So everything is about politics, not the fact that it's the senator who actually represents the border there. All right, Julie Sirkin on Capitol Hill for us. Julie, thank you. Joining me now on set is someone who knows a lot about pragmatism in Washington. It's former Republican senator and defense secretary in the Obama administration, Chuck Hagel. Senator Hagel, good to see you.
Thanks, Todd.
In a weird way, I don't know whether you're the right person to ask this because you were a senator that sort of realized, and you were part of a Senate that realized, well, stuff only got done once the center sort of exerted itself. Right now, the center has been totally, I think, gutted right now. Even maybe just gutted rhetorically, but it's been gutted in that building over there next door to us.
Well, Chuck, the fact is, this is where I think you start. Representative government can't long exist without respect for each other and each other's opinions and compromise, because there's only one alternative to that. That's authoritarian government. And so that's why, when you look at the larger picture here, this is why, aside from the specific problems and issues, the seriousness of those, this is so dangerous. Because this has been continuing, and it's getting worse and worse. And each side responds to, no, we're not going to help the other side.
You just heard her reporting.
Yep.
Kevin McCarthy doesn't want to have to muscle through a Title 42 bill because that might help the administration.
Help the other side.
You know, the Biden administration doesn't want to negotiate with McCarthy, might give him a win. And we're just sitting there going, and they don't, well, what point are we all in the same, are we on the same team or not?
One of the things that I would say occasionally when I was in the Senate and give a speech on the Senate floor, I'd remind my colleagues, all my colleagues, that we each took an oath of office when we got here. And the oath of office was not to a party, was not to a philosophy, not to a president, but to the Constitution, the people. Our jobs were to make America better. Take a look at the problems, see if we can fix the problems. That means coming together. And somehow that's evaporated. Somehow that is not now the central point of government.
Look, we invited you here. You're one of a number of secretaries, former secretaries of defense that have signed a letter to basically to Tommy Tuberville, the senator from Alabama, who's been holding up defense Pentagon nominations. Look, it's the senator's right to do this, right? It's the Mr. Smith point, right? A senator does have, one senator can do these things. You know, 10 years ago, if a bunch of Secretary of Defense did that, problem solved within a day or two. I'm curious, have you been surprised at how little impact you guys have had?
Well, that letter was sent out yesterday, so
we'll wait and see.
We'll see.
Yeah.
I'll give it some time.
Yeah, but you get my larger point here.
I get it. And to really think about what this means, when you're holding, one senator is holding all flag general officer nominees, almost 200, and 80 of them are 3 and 4-star generals and admirals, and we're locked into, we can't move on new commanders, a new chairman, new chiefs, until those are confirmed. The realization of the impact of that and the danger of that, it's astounding to me that the senators have not understood how dangerous this is. And if they don't change this, and if they don't change it very quickly, there will be very difficult and serious consequences to our national security.
You know, this is what something you and I were talking about before the show began, which is there's a lot of inexperienced people on Capitol Hill. Senator Tuberville knew nothing about American politics before, and he will tell you this. I mean, he was a football coach, and he was a very active football coach, and that is more than a full-time job when you're doing college football recruiting. Do you get the sense that some of these folks don't understand the impact they're having on what it does to the military?
I think so. I mean, another element of this we mentioned in the letter is what it does to the families of these men and women who have devoted their lives, and the family devote their lives too. Right. And it puts them in limbo. They can't move, but more to the point, I don't think they have many of them have any sense of the consequences of something like this. We've never seen anything like this. This has been going on for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Right.
And I hope the leadership and enough senators understand how serious this is to be able to move the senator. One thing that you said is important, and we're not challenging this. Every representative of government has rights to challenge issues, but there are legitimate ways to do that. You can introduce legislation to change an issue in DOD. You can go to the National Defense Authorization Act. You can hold hearings, a lot of ways, but not take our military leaders hostage. That's what they're doing.
Right.
They're taking a political hostage to what you want for your one parochial small issue.
All right, let me get you to answer a question that I bet you many people ask you all the time is, what the heck happened to the Republican Party and how does it get fixed?
I do get to that question, and I saw this coming years ago. I got elected to the Senate in 1996. When I got elected, I was fortunate to have an opportunity to serve with really wonderful Democrat and Republicans and many World War II senators. The World War II senators had an immense amount of respect, and they made things work because of their background, living
Dole
through
and Inouye are probably the two most prominent of the two, obviously.
Absolutely.
Big Democrat, big Republican, forever. Yeah.
World War II experience, both wounded, near death. But you had others. You had Moynihan, and you Hollings and Warner. And when we lost those people, then the radical right of the party started to really take charge. I would say the Democrats also need to be held accountable on their side of this, too. I think it's more obvious on the Republican side.
Yeah.
And I saw it. I mean, you start with Newt Gingrich's 1994 contract with America.
Right.
You will absolutely sign this. And politics now is about absolutism.
Yeah.
That's what it's like a religion. The other side are dumb. And matter of fact, they're worse than dumb. They're un-American. Right. They hate America.
Right.
And when you start out like that in politics, you're going to find a very bad place you end up for the country. And that's what we should all be about, and put the country first.
I always said the whole reason why we design politics is to solve a dispute without a weapon. It wouldn't be a bad idea.
It wouldn't.
Chuck Hagel, it's good to see you.
Thanks, Chuck.
For coming on,
appreciate it.
Sharing some of your experience with us. Up next, crisis of confidence for the High Court. Another day, another revelation about an unusual financial arrangement tied to the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and his family. What it means, why it matters. Panel is next. Plus, Russia's mercenaries are launching a war of words on Moscow for battlefield failures in Ukraine. Look at the latest from the war zone. Is this propaganda to spin our heads? Or is there something going on inside the Kremlin? You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we said at the top of the show, and certainly what I believe in, it's our hyper-partisan environment that makes it impossible for us to find any solution to any problem, whether it's the border, the debt ceiling, you name it. But it's also contributing to this crisis of confidence facing the Supreme Court, the lack of a solution there as well. Drip, drip, drip of headlines about Justice Clarence Thomas continue today as the Washington Post reported that a judicial activist named Leonard Leo directed fees to Thomas's wife, Ginny, but was sure to make public mention to say, and by the way, please don't mention her name. It's the latest revelation about Thomas and an undisclosed financial ties to a conservative activist or donor. This may also be the first time Thomas has faced scrutiny tied to someone who directly had business before the court. Now, according to the Washington Post, the same year those fees were directed to Justice Thomas's wife, Leonard Leo's nonprofit, the Judicial Education Project, filed a brief before the Supreme Court in a landmark voting rights case. So let's bring in the panel. I got Scott Wong, he's senior congressional reporter for us at NBC News. Daniela Gibbs-Leger, senior vice president for communications and strategy at the Center for American Progress, and Brad Todd, a Republican strategist. Scott, let me start with you. This is the drip, drip, drip keeps coming on this front, and this one, the unusual detail of finding out that Leonard Leo specifically said, please don't mention Ginny by name. I mean, that's a version of a smoking gun, although I don't know if it's illegal what they did.
Well, and now it just fits this pattern. There's a crisis of confidence with the Supreme Court. A large part of that has to do with Clarence Thomas and this GOP donor that is paying for lavish trips. Now we learn that he's paying for school tuition, private school tuition for his grandnephew. Not a whole lot of disclosure. And so on Capitol Hill, the conversation has fallen back into partisan terms. Democrats like Dick Durbin, the Senate Judiciary Committee chairman, wants, he's holding hearings. He wants a code of conduct for the Supreme Court. Republicans are saying, look, that's a whole separate branch of government. We don't have jurisdiction here. And so Republicans and Democrats are talking past each other.
Right.
It's more evidence of, the dysfunction on Capitol Hill. They can't even agree, on how to govern the Supreme Court.
But I think when it comes to the head of the judiciary branch here, I think the onus right now is on John Roberts, Danielle. I think, he's the head of the judiciary branch. Now, if he's choosing not to do anything about it, that's because I do think there is a separation of powers issue here.
I mean, there is, but I know that there's more that Congress can do than absolutely nothing. And if you look at what's happening, I think Democrats and Republicans, the ones who aren't in Washington, D.C., understand that this is ridiculous. I had more ethics on me as just a staffer at the White House than they do on a Supreme Court.
Every one of my staff here, we have more ethical guidelines we have to follow with our company. At NBC News,
right.
the court.
It's absolutely ridiculous. And you're talking about people who have business before the court, giving money and literally writing down, don't mention her name. Like, you can't be any clearer than that this is a problem.
And, Brad, it seems like the real problem is that this is a cancer that will spread, meaning right now, I know a lot of conservatives think this is a pile-on Clarence Thomas because the left doesn't like Clarence Thomas. So we've already seen some conservative media go after Sonia Sotomayor. You and I both know what's going to happen. Eventually, we'll tar and feather all 9 of them, and nobody will have faith in any of them.
Well, anyone should be talking about Clarence Thomas should talk about Sonia Sotomayor, who had a book deal, and she didn't recuse herself when her publisher had a case come before the court.
That, but the
it should be in the same story.
The point is we're going to slime the entire institution if John Roberts doesn't step up and do something.
I don't think the burden's on John Roberts. I think the burden is on Senate Democrats to step back and recognize that there's a separation of power here. I think it's an expression that Democrats don't have a lot of confidence in their ability to hold the Senate. They want to try to force Clarence Thomas out. They want to do it while they have a 51-seat majority and Joe Biden is president.
I don't think that's true at all.
You don't think this is just a bad look for the Supreme Court?
I think this is a sign of desperation from Senate Democrats. I think they want to push it out while they have a majority. They think it's fleeting.
How are you absolving John Roberts of any responsibility here? I don't understand that. How does he have no responsibility over his court, over the ethics that should be guiding his court so that they do maintain the full faith?
I think we have established judicial canons in this country. The justices have to follow those. The public can make their mind up about it, but they get a lifetime deal for a reason, right? They're supposed to be beyond reach of the legislative branch so that they're independent of it. John Roberts' job is to run the Supreme Court and to set the standard for justices.
But, Scott, the real problem is the confidence in the court. And the public confidence has collapsed. I mean, I put up some polling yesterday.
On the left?
Oh, disagree. There's lack of confidence on both sides. It improved slightly on the right after Dobbs. But it's been negative throughout the last, because the entire judiciary, the entire right wing is fond of attacking judges all the time, as you know.
My point was the court hadn't lost its legitimacy recently. It's lost its legitimacy a long time ago.
Well, it depends on, it's been a partisan legitimacy at each side. My point is, guess what? Everybody's now been tarred and feathered. The point is the entire court is seen as, I think our judiciary branch in this country, I think what we're seeing in North Carolina, I think we saw a celebration of an election in Wisconsin. I think our judiciary branch has been overly politicized, and I don't think it is trustworthy, left or right. And I think the public is starting to see that.
Yeah, and so you have progressives now like Jamal Bowman, AOC, saying people like Clarence Thomas need to resign over these stories that have emerged. They need to be impeached. That is another. That is the one power.
That is the one power Congress does have over the courts.
Will it happen?
No,
absolutely not. And so we're stuck in the same situation.
Right, but there's something in the middle between impeachment and doing absolutely nothing, and that's what needs to be figured out.
Well, that's my point here, and going back to the larger issue, which is there are no grown-ups in that United States Senate. There's not a single, and I'd like somebody to point them out to me, but there's very few grown-ups, because we all know what's wrong with the debt ceiling, we all know what's wrong with the immigration issue, and we all know what's wrong with the Supreme Court situation, but everybody's afraid of saying what they really think because they'll get bounced by the base. Am I not wrong about this, Brad?
Well, far more people in the U.S. Senate fear losing a primary than fear losing a general election. And that's true on both sides. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, especially given the fact that Senate races now cost $75 or $80 million. Most of that money comes from very ideological people giving $50 or $100 or $200. Who knew that small dollar money would make senators more ideological?
That's an interesting thing. Do you buy that thesis that the small donor base has made us more partisan?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I believe it's the large donations that are coming in, especially the ones that are unchecked and unknown. That's what is corrupting our politics. And that's why we need to get large corporations, we need to get money out of politics.
On the Republican side, the most moderate donors we have are the ones that write the largest checks. The most ideological ones are the ones that write the smallest checks.
I have heard that. He's not wrong. He isn't wrong on that. That is the irony. And if you follow Harlan Crow's donations, he's not as far right as some of the other donors that some of the
Harlan Crow is John Cornyn's chief fundraiser.
Yeah, I know. He's more of a Chamber of Commerce type donor.
I wouldn't say
back
that John
in the day.
Cornyn's like a middle of the road guy.
Well, I think the whole Overton window has shifted over the last few years. I don't think you would have called Mitt Romney a moderate 10 years ago.
No, I would not have.
Okay.
I will give you that.
Okay, fair enough.
And I probably still wouldn't.
Let me move to debt ceiling, Scott. You know, when Janet Yellen came out and said, hey, this is now June 1st, I thought a mistake the White House made was not moving up their meeting. Because if she's coming out to say, hey, this is even more dire, it's sooner, why didn't the president say, guys, instead of Tuesday, you're coming in Friday?
I was having a lot of conversations on the Hill just this week asking the same question. Why isn't there more urgency? Why are lawmakers heading off for a long weekend this weekend? Why do there continue to be recess weeks in the month of May when they have moved up this timetable to June the 1st? I haven't gotten a good answer. I do know that Kevin McCarthy has been traveling abroad, meeting with the Pope, meeting with other world leaders, and so that could have been part of this. But, what could be more important right now than the full faith and credit of the United States?
Daniela, don't you think this, if the White House wants to sell this catastrophic urgency, they should have called for their meeting earlier.
And do you think that would have changed anything?
The point is, if you're going to want the high ground, always take the high ground. That's my point. Okay. You can't pick and choose when you get to be on the high ground.
All right, I hear that, but I don't think moving up a meeting 4 days is necessarily taking the high ground. They're going to have this meeting, and we're going to see what happens. But be very clear, if they had a meeting today or 2 days ago or whatever, we are still at a point where one party is playing with the full faith and credit of the United States, and another one is saying, let's do what we always do and let's not default on our bills that we have already spent, that we have done all this time before. Let's not make it a political ploy and crater the economy.
The House of Representatives has passed an increase in the debt ceiling. And let's be clear, Joe Biden has not yet come through with something that Democrats will clear the Senate. And Biden promised us that his skill set was that he could negotiate in Congress, that he would be more bipartisan than Donald Trump has. Now it's time.
Can Kevin McCarthy maneuver?
He has.
No.
He has.
No. He got this.
He has.
Maneuver? This is an unpassable bill. He knows that. Can he move when the bill becomes more passable?
Well, wait a minute. Joe Biden's suggesting something that's unpassable in the House, too.
I understand that.
Let's see.
Whatever's agreed to, at some point, McCarthy has to stand up and do it. Is he
first off,
afraid to do it or
saying
not?
that hurting Republicans in the U.S. House is like hurting cats is an insult to cats. So I don't want to overpromise here. But Kevin McCarthy has passed a bill. It's Joe Biden's job to come and meet him in the middle.
Well, we shall see what. Well, that's my curiosity. Is there a middle? And I don't know if there's a middle that Kevin McCarthy's allowed to negotiate on. Scott, what's your sense?
There may be a middle, but it could cost Kevin McCarthy his job in the end.
We've seen this before, haven't we?
It's not a movie. It's not Empire Strikes Back. I did not want this sequel. Daniela Gibbs-Lachey, Brent Todd, and Scott Wong. May the 5th be with you. You can hear more on The Disappearing Center on the latest episode of the Chuck Todd Cast. I sat down with Robert Draper of the New York Times, who spent months interviewing Kirsten Sinema about where moderates fit in today's politics. Get it wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be right back. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. In a stunning public condemnation, the head of a Russian mercenary group railed against Moscow's military leaders, blaming them for the heavy losses suffered by his fighters. In a graphic and expletive-laden rant made while standing over the dead bodies of Russian fighters, The Wagner Group's leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, blamed the losses on the lack of ammunition and support from Moscow, adding that he will withdraw his troops from the long-contested city of Bakhmut. The White House estimates Russia has suffered more than 100,000 casualties just since December, including 20,000 killed in action. Of those 20,000 killed, they estimate half were from the Wagner Group. Joining me now is Ellison Barber, who's in Kyiv for us. I'll also be speaking with Mike McFaul, our former ambassador to Moscow and an NBC News national security analyst. But let me get what's going on the ground there. Ellison, I have to say, and I'm going to talk to Mike more about whether we're being spun here by Russian propaganda or something has opened into the public sphere. But what's the Ukrainian government's response to this?
Ukrainian officials are not buying Prigozhin's claims here, to put it simply. I mean, you mentioned and showed some of that video. The videos themselves, they're shocking. They're incredibly graphic. We have heard Prigozhin in the last week or so make this claim that he says Russia's Ministry of Defense is not providing them with enough ammunition. But in these videos, one, he's showing incredibly graphic images of just rows of dead soldiers. He's also specifically calling out some of Russia's top defense officials by name and angrily saying, if you don't send us more ammunition, we are going to leave this city by Wednesday. He claims at one point in one of these videos, all of them posted to his social media accounts a month ago, they, meaning Russian defense officials, stopped providing ammunition to us, and we have been receiving no more than 10% of what's needed. So Ukraine's deputy defense minister, very quickly after these videos started circulating, said that Russia is desperately trying to seize the city of Bakhmut by Tuesday, May 9th. That's an important holiday in Russia, what's known as Victory Day. She says Russia is actually moving Wagner fighters from other directions and replacing them with paratrooper assault units that are currently fighting in the direction of Bakhmut. Then we also heard from a spokesperson for the eastern group of Ukraine's armed forces, claiming that Wagner's fighters are not dying because they lack ammunition. He says Ukrainian positions in Bakhmut have been hit 520 times just in the last day. He says Wagner's forces are suffering such high rates because they're simply being outfought by Ukrainian forces. He says he believes that Prigozhin's claim here is a way to sort of justify, in his view, why they have not been able to take this city in over 8 months and why, in his view, Wagner's forces are failing here. Chuck?
Ellison Barber on the ground force in Kyiv. Ellison, thank you. Let me move over to Mike McFaul. Mike, look, you know this world as well as anybody. Are we being, is this propaganda or is there something happening here?
No, Chuck, I think there's something happening here. What's to be gained by Vladimir Putin from having this open dispute between Prigozhin and the regular armed forces? They've been fighting, by the way, informally, privately, for a long, long time, even going back to when I was the ambassador. Think about it. If you're the commander, if you're Gerasimov, the commander of the Russian armed forces, and this private guy with his private military is showing up all over the place, you're not going to like that no matter what. And they especially don't like it when they're losing. And they have been in Bakhmut for a long time, as you were just discussing. This is the Battle of Stalingrad equivalent for this war. By the way, the Ukrainians have been battling and losing a lot of people there, too. This, I think, suggests that it hasn't gone well, and Prigozhin is striking back.
So this is a case, look, happened in this country where a general on the ground in Iraq would say, hey, the folks in Washington don't know what they're talking about. A general on the ground in Vietnam, breaking ranks to say, hey, the Washington doesn't know what they're talking about. So you think this is more in line of that?
With one big exception. Nobody's saying Putin doesn't know what he's talking about, right? So there's other historical analogies. That was an indirect criticism of the president. They would never criticize the president, but they are using public media and Prigozhin. Remember, Prigozhin's the same guy that interfered in our elections in 2016. He's got lots of different companies. He's in the disinformation business. I think he's doing this as a way to get President Putin's attention.
What is his ultimate ambition? Yeah, I mean, does he see himself as an heir to Putin?
You know, many people speculate that. I think that's unlikely. Doesn't mean he doesn't think that. I just think it's unlikely.
Right.
His public posture has grown significantly in the last year and a half. Remember, he was always a behind-the-scenes guy. You're showing photos there that probably go back years and years because there were so few photos of him. Lately, he's been public, taking on the military, and he wants to be to the right of everybody, right? He wants to say if this war goes badly, and so far it is going badly.
Right.
Had I been in charge, had my guys been better armed, we could have won this war. And I do think that's setting him up for some political future that he wants to try.
Well, do you think it's possible Putin fires his commanders and puts his chef in charge here?
I don't. I think it's unlikely. I think he'll keep them around. You know, Putin likes to keep his options open. He likes to keep people guessing. He's not going to just throw them under the bus, but I don't think he would overthrow Gerasimov and his defense minister Shoigu. Yeah. He's also a close personal friend of Putin. That, I think, would cause even more troubles within the Russian military, the conventional military.
Right. Well, this is obviously, if this is real and this infighting is real, this is the time to strike. If you're the Ukrainians with your counteroffensive, they're infighting, they're not prepared. What's your sense? I mean, there's been some questions about whether Ukraine has enough to actually succeed in this counteroffensive.
Well, first two things. It's coming. There's no doubt in my mind. I don't know when exactly, and I don't know where exactly. Everybody presumes they know where this is going to be. When everybody's saying they know it's going to happen, it suggests to me there might be another plan. But they are ready. They wanted more. They would like to be more prepared. They would like to have F-16s. They would like to have ATACMS, these long-range missile systems. But that debate is over for now. According to the Biden administration, 98% of what they've asked for to do this counteroffensive has been supplied. And so I think it's coming, and I think they're just waiting for the right conditions, weather conditions on the ground before they launch.
Mike McFaul, on what was quite a dramatic sort of 24 hours with what may be going on inside the Russian military circles. We shall see. It's great to talk with you, sir.
And we didn't even talk about the drones, Chuck. That's
I know. I'm sorry. That's
so much is going on.
So much. That's 3-day-old news, Mike. Come on now. Thank you, brother. Up next, the president touts a better-than-expected jobs report as he faces a potential economic disaster if he can't get Congress to raise the nation's borrowing limit. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. It has been an interesting week for the U.S. economy, to say the least. What began with the second-largest bank failure in American history is ending with a better-than-expected jobs report. The economy added 253,000 new jobs last month, according to the Labor Department. It beat Wall Street's predictions. The unemployment rate was also a tad lower than expected at 3.4%, tied for the lowest level since Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. While meeting with cabinet members at the White House today, President Biden touted those numbers while lashing out at the Republican economic agenda. His comments come as he prepares to meet congressional leaders in just a few days about avoiding a catastrophic government default.
Unfortunately, I won't say Republican because I think they're pretty well divided, but our MAGA Republicans in Congress are threatening to do all this progress by letting us, quote, default on the debt unless we agree to their demands. The two are totally unrelated. Whether you pay the debt or not, and let's get it straight, we're trying to hold the debt hostage to us to agree to some draconian cuts.
Mike Memoli covers the White House for NBC News. He joins me now. Mike, I want to ask you a question they asked Scott Wong earlier. You know, I think it was last Friday at this time, Janet Yellen came out with a new estimate that said, boy, we're going to hit the debt ceiling a little bit sooner than we thought, first week in June. Why didn't the White House move up the meeting?
They did move up the meeting, Chuck. They went from not having a meeting at all to really scrambling to put that meeting together next Tuesday. Remember, the White House position had really been, even just 48 hours before that letter was released, that the president had no intention still of inviting Speaker McCarthy to come over to the White House. The White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, acknowledged to me in the briefing room this week that letter, they did have some advance notice, but it did lead to the president making those calls to the Big Four. So they would have had it sooner if Kevin McCarthy wasn't off on his world tour, as the Speaker often does during a congressional recess. And so now we have this meeting. This is one of those two developments that really caught the White House's strategy off guard. The other one was the fact that the House Republicans managed to actually pass something. The White House had sort of been banking on the fact that McCarthy took 15 votes to become Speaker, likely was never going to get 218 votes. He got 217, which was enough to pass this budget plan. And so now you see the White House really making every effort to get to a maybe short-term extension. June 1st certainly was sooner than they were expecting, most analysts were expecting. And so now they want to much more clearly link this to the budget fight that has to happen around the end of the federal fiscal year, which is September 30th. You saw the president holding up his hands today in the Roosevelt Room, that these are separate, but everyone here in Washington knows that that linkage of the two is ultimately how everyone saves a little face here.
I was just going to say, Mike, so that White House is okay with, essentially what you're saying is, you think the compromise is going to be a short-term lift, and essentially we're going to guarantee a government shutdown and a debt ceiling and a debt default at the same time come September 30th?
Well, that's the hope from the White House at this point. But remember, they don't even know that they have, let's say, 9, 10 Republican votes in the Senate to get there, depending on whether we see Dianne Feinstein back next week. And where are the votes in the House to pass a clean increase at this stage when Republicans have already gone on record on this budget bill? So this may be what the White House hopes to see happen, but I think all of us are really wondering whether or not this is going to happen. And that's why, even though the White House doesn't want to offer this in the top tier of possibilities, you hear things like the 14th Amendment mentioned as a potential failsafe. The White House doesn't want to make a bigger thing of that because they don't want to take the pressure off these negotiations. They want to see Republicans come to the table and maybe get this part through, but they don't want to necessarily take it off the table because that might be the only way we get there.
Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of members of Congress who need to feel the shock of the electric fence before they'll believe the fence has been electrified. Hey, I want to play a soundbite of something the president said earlier today and ask you about it. Here it is.
We've got a lot of work to do. I'm doing a major press conference this afternoon, so I love you all, but I'd like to ask you to leave so we can get down to business.
Well, that was news to a lot of us, and it is now almost 5 o'clock here in the East. I assume there is no press conference? Is there one in the works that we don't know about?
No, Chuck. All that happened after the president said that was he went out for tacos with Vice President Harris to celebrate Cinco de Mayo. And so no press conference. What the president, we think, was referring to is the fact that he's about to, in the next few minutes, sit down with our MSNBC colleague Stephanie Ruhle for an interview. This is the first interview he's done since, remember, he announced his re-election campaign a couple weeks ago. It's already been, in the rearview mirror here. And so he was maybe conflating those two, but it only gave Republicans an opportunity, especially at the RNC, to point out he hasn't done a solo news conference. And Chuck, I don't even remember the last time he did it. He obviously took a couple questions with the South Korean president last week, but it's been some time since he's been in a formal Q&A session with us in the White House press corps. Yeah, and not a lot of sit-downs with mainstream media. That's a moment I'm guessing the White House wished didn't happen today. That's right. Mike Memoli at the White House for us. Mike, thank you. Still ahead, a big finish for Florida's legislative session. They got big wins for the governor, but did he really win anything? What it all means for the 2024 race. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. If it's Friday, at least right now, we've got a new episode of Meet the Press Reports, because tonight we are kicking off a new season, season 6 of our magazine show, where we take a deep dive into a single issue. And this week we are looking at Republican efforts to restrict drag performances. It's obviously a new battle in the culture wars. Republican state legislatures nationwide have been enacting more aggressive anti-LGBTQ laws, mostly really focusing on transgender Americans. In this week's episode, my colleague Antonia Hilton traveled to Tennessee, which became the first state in the country to go a step further and pass an anti-drag law in March. Even though the law has been temporarily blocked by a federal judge, its impacts are already being felt by performers like Story Van Ness. Take a listen.
As a transgender woman raised in Tennessee, she spent years hiding who she was. It wasn't until she turned 18 and stepped out onto her first drag show stage that she realized it didn't have to be that way.
And I didn't have the words for it. It was one of the few times I felt powerful, I felt seen, I felt right in my skin. I can do anything I need to do when I'm in drag.
Wait, are all the children out of the building? Are there any children? Look around. If you're a child, raise your hand. Not emotionally, I mean like legally.
For Story and her friend who performs under the name Harry Scary, it's begun to feel like their very existence is a political act.
The agenda is to just exist and to feel valid.
The agenda is to be able to go to the bathroom without having to worry about being punched in the face.
State Senate Majority Leader Jack Johnson, a Republican from Franklin, Tennessee, sponsored the new restrictive legislation. The law targets adult-oriented performances that are harmful to minors. It doesn't say exactly how performances will be determined to be harmful or sexual. Have you been to drag shows?
Have not. But I've seen videos. I've seen videos of drag. Well, and I guess I should say, have I been to places where a man was dressed as a woman and performing or singing, and maybe they were dressed, it was a Halloween party and they were dressed up as Dolly Parton? Of course I have.
Are you trying to send a signal?
Of course
that
not.
Some types of communities, some types of people aren't welcome here in Tennessee?
The only signal I'm trying to send is that you shouldn't be doing sexually graphic, you shouldn't be simulating sex acts in front of children.
By the way, the law doesn't seem to target gentlemen's clubs or other things like that, for what it's worth. You can see much more of Antonia's reporting tonight at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time on News Now. It'll be on demand on Peacock and YouTube beginning on Sunday. And speaking of the culture wars and GOP efforts to galvanize support around anti-LGBTQ laws, let's turn to the state of Florida, where Governor Ron DeSantis is wrapping up a whirlwind legislative session as he tries to tee up his bid for the presidency. It's been a busy 60 days for DeSantis, who used the Republican supermajority in the state legislature to pass bills on everything from abortion, guns, immigration, social governance, all while leaning into major culture war issues. DeSantis' shift to the right, an apparent bid to woo primary voters who, as we've mentioned repeatedly this hour, are increasingly more partisan and dug in. Joining me now is our senior national political reporter based in Florida, Matt Dixon. And Matt, there is something about today and the end of the legislative session that doesn't feel like an exclamation point for DeSantis 2024. This feels like as successful as the session itself might have been, everything that happened sort of surrounding it really seemed to deflate the DeSantis presidential balloon a little bit. How do they feel in Tallahassee?
Right now, I think they're hoping to use this as a bit of a reset because obviously Governor DeSantis has had a bad couple months. Trump's attacked him, almost daily at times. His poll numbers have tanked, but he has gotten, as you just mentioned, there's some really big wins, and essentially his entire agenda has been given to him by a relatively compliant Republican legislature here. So what we're going to see, I think, over the next few weeks is DeSantis going across the state, doing high-profile bill signings and sort of touting his agenda in a bit of a victory lap, an in-state victory lap, leading up to probably an early June presidential launch, which I think everyone thinks is still coming. And they're hoping to sort of recapture that momentum and reset a little bit using the agenda that the Republican legislature here in Tallahassee has sort of just handed him.
That's interesting. In some ways, do almost like a one last Florida tour before he hits the national trail.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think he's going to be doing things like bill signings and things out of state, but I do think there's going to be a healthy dose of sort of the optics that brought DeSantis to the national dance, and there's going to be a lot of culture war talk and some of him getting back to his comfort zone as he explains his agenda to his recently passed agenda to Florida voters and those beyond. I mean, a lot of those press conferences, in state or not, a lot of national attention.
I know you've been talking to some Florida legislatures on the Republican side of the aisle. At times they said they had been exhausted by all of this, that this session sort of, and I know some of them are fearing that this Disney stuff may only be the beginning, right, not the end on that stuff. Has he lost luster with that group of folks, or are they, complaining, but like, hey, no, they're still going to rally around their guy?
I mean, luster is subjective. I mean, he certainly has luster in the sense of power. I mean, no one will get in his way here. I do think there are members who, as I've mentioned previously, who aren't probably as high on him as they were before this session and sort of got that DeSantis fatigue. But I think overall, at the end of the day, if we tally up when the state level lawmakers here start making endorsements, I still think DeSantis is gonna certainly run the legislature. He's got a veto pen upcoming, which I think everyone's aware of. So I think folks are either going to sit on the sideline or start backing him to make sure they get all their local community grants and stuff staying in the budget.
You don't think Susie Wiles has another trick up her sleeve with the state legislature, like she did with the congressional delegation?
I think there's a real. I think there's a real chance Trump picks some off. I don't think it's going to be a clean sweep, but I don't think DeSantis has necessarily lost the legislature. There's going to be pockets of it, and it's there's a whole bunch of Republicans here and a whole bunch of politically ambitious people that want stuff, and I think Trump will get some.
Well, as you were hinting at, he's going to be governor, worst case scenario, for a bunch more legislative sessions. And some of those guys are going to want him to do stuff. Matt Dixon, who's based in Florida for us, tracking our national political story there. Matt, thank you. Thank you all for being with us this hour. I'll be back Monday with more Meet the Press Now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.